Hi. Oh, good, you can hear me. I like to always start with pictures of my dog because it butters up the crowd. This is my dog, Watson. I have stickers of him. So I am a rapporteur for standards relating to the Cyber Resilience Act. I'll explain that in a second. I also, as Ujjwal mentioned, I work for ECMA now. I was a JavaScript developer for a long time and then chair of TC39. And I am blessed and cursed with being web adjacent forever. That's cool. I can work with that. So we're here to talk about the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, which is product safety regulation in Europe for software and products that contain software. It is specifically aimed at cybersecurity, and it's going to impact software developers on every continent in one way or another. So as rapporteur, I try to interpret the regulation from a technical perspective, just like a judge will interpret it from a legal perspective, which is challenging, but kind of also exciting. I always keep a copy of the Cyber Resilience Act with me. It is very long, and my copy is very highlighted. Because understanding the whole thing is how I try to distill it so that I can attempt to explain the parts that people actually need to know about. So the CRA being product safety regulation is useful information, but truly understanding why it exists is probably just as important. Cyber attacks are increasingly becoming a weapon of war, and consumer devices are on the front line of that. But there's not a lot of market benefit for most organizations to improve the cybersecurity of their products because they don't really have any real consequences if something goes sideways for their users. So the goal of the CRA is to sort of level that playing field so that everybody is required to implement those security benefits for their users. Conformity with the CRA is required for any product sold in Europe. So even if you're not based here, odds are good that somebody in your organization wants access to the European single market. I hear that's good. I recently learned it's bigger than the U.S. market. We used to kind of go back and forth. Anyway, we're going to call that a business need because we're going to come back to that. So this applies to all products that are sold with software, including what we refer to as the default product. A lot of you work on browsers. Browsers have additional obligations, extra scrutiny, but everything that I go through is going to apply. And then Dan's going to go through sort of the layer on top for important and critical products such as browsers. No matter how Apple circa 2008 tried to convince us all, websites are not apps. Even if you press the little button to install the PWA on your home screen, that's not an app, that's not covered by the CRA. It is covered by some regulations, but not this one. Also, it's important to understand that giving something away for free is not the same thing as an exemption because it's not economic activity. The use of personal information might be sort of the economic activity. There's kind of a very, very, very long list of possibilities. So just because something is free doesn't mean it's exempt. Tomorrow there will be a workshop, tomorrow morning there will be a workshop on the CRA, and we can go deep into the exemptions for open source, which is functionally excluded from the CRA. There are some responsibilities on the parts of like the big foundations and maybe some companies that have like one sort of token or one sort of a flagship open source product, but that's not the same thing as the legal requirements. Yeah, we'll go into more detail on that tomorrow. So with the exception of vulnerability handling, the CRA has no real input on internal processes. I have some suggestions that I'm going to make, but ultimately, as long as your organization puts out a product that is secure, the CRA isn't interested in how you got there. You can do what you want. We have some recommendations. I would like to assume that you're all already accomplishing many, if not most, of the CRA's essential requirements. That is, you do your risk assessment, you apply industry security best practices, you manage responsible vulnerability handling, and then you document everything. And I think for a lot of mature products and mature organizations, the documenting everything part is probably going to be the hardest. So first things first, you need to do a risk assessment, understand your users and how they're using your product. Hopefully this will be handled by your CISO or somebody in their org, because line engineers should be focusing on the product, right? The CRA really emphasizes taking a risk-based approach. And what that means is not everybody needs lockdown mode. You have to understand sort of which threats you're mitigating before you can start applying controls. But those requirements that I mentioned, they're called the Essential Cybersecurity Requirements, aka the ESRs. Yes, I know. The ESRs, there's 14 of them, and this is the actual text from the regulation. Just kind of going through it quickly, I'm not going to try to assault you with verbatim legalese. You have to ship your product without known exploitable vulnerabilities. That sometimes people read that and they think that's literally impossible. What's wrong with you? Again, risk-based approach. Understand how your users use your product and understand what possible vulnerabilities could impact their use and their cybersecurity. Maybe you include a component that has like a 9 CVE, but that actual component, you're not even using those code paths. Not an exploitable vulnerability. So understanding how your users use your product, everything kind of comes back to that. Shipping with secure by default configuration, unless you have an agreement with a business partner to not do that for some reason. That means you are allowed to provide options for your users to customize the product, use it how they want to use it. You just can't ship your product with like the don't bother warning me when I'm about to do something terrible option on. You know, like you have to let your users make those choices themselves. We have automatic security updates. We've gotten, I think as an industry, done a really good job with that. You have to give users an opt-out, so you need to automatically update, and you need to let users choose not to, because that's their problem, not yours. We have IAM, identity and access management. This is absolutely product dependent. Some products aren't even going to contemplate this. Some products have very, very serious implications there. Confidentiality of stored and transmitted data. Similarly, process data, data minimization, making sure that you are keeping data like encrypted at rest, that kind of thing. If you have some sort of a cybersecurity event, you are required to reduce the impact on the software and devices around you. So you need to design your product in a way that, like, if you are compromised, it doesn't take down the whole city. You know, make sure basic functions use even in an incident, and allow for secure deletion. That's sort of like the fastest way I can get through the 14 ESRs. Europe is kind of done with companies being like, you can't blame me. I didn't make the component that was inside of my product. You have to blame the other guy. Europe's not feeling that anymore. You can't just like cover your ears and say la la la. Any code that you, the general you, write yourself, you're responsible for, but you're also responsible for your entire product. And that means any components that you include, any modules that you include, you are responsible for the security of your product. And Europe is completely done with anything they perceive as shirking responsibility. So there's a lot about vulnerability handling that I could go through. It's a 45-minute talk on its own. I'm not going to try to get through all of it today, but I'll try to get through like the egregiously short version, which is you have to have an SBOM, a software bill of materials. You have to have a single point of contact for receiving reports, and it has to be in a medium that your reporters are used to. So like, you can't say like, if you want to report a bug, you have to go through a chatbot, because that's not how your reporters are expecting to interact with you in that way. You need a documented plan for how you're going to handle vulnerabilities, and you need to handle them in the time frames specified, which is for severe incident or discovering actively exploited vulnerabilities, 24 hours, you need to notify ENISA. Within 72 hours, you need to be ready to tell ENISA what the general nature of the exploit and what your mitigating measures are and what your customers can do to mitigate their impact, especially if it's ongoing. Depending on sort of where you fall in the important and critical world and how severe the incident is, within 14 to 30 days, you need to come up with a report, generally with like a root cause analysis, that kind of thing. And ultimately, you have to tell your users something happened, or ENISA will, and you really don't want that because it's going to be embarrassing and probably also cost you a lot of money. And the open source crew is going to really appreciate the fact that you are legally required to upstream your fixes. So if your vulnerability was something in a module that you import that you are not the original author on, and you fork it and fix it and then ship your product with that forked version, you are required to supply that fixed code to the original author. They aren't required to accept it. They can do what they want with it. You know, if you're an open source maintainer, you continue to just do what you want. But the manufacturers are required to provide you with their fix, so you can choose to utilize that. So, but onto the documentation. This is the, I think, the hard part for a mature org that's already put a lot of thought into cybersecurity. Your internal technical documentation, that internal part's important because it's going to have a lot of information, and every time people hear documentation, they think that means it's going to be an obligation to publish to their users. Not the same thing. Your internal technical documentation needs to show evidence that you conform to the ESRs. For example, by conforming to a standard that is cited to provide that conformity. You should be including test runner output, but also ADRs, UI screenshots, any other cybersecurity standards that your product conforms to, any information about how you conform. And write down all the good choices that you're already making. Start with basic info. The intended purpose of the product, the versions that this documentation covers, photos and illustrations if it's hardware, and a copy of any instructions that you provide to your users. Then you have the diagrams of component relationships. That right there is a full-time job for someone for the next year. I'm positive of it. Diagrams of your component relationships, your SBOM, any other evidence of how the architecture decision-making is done. You need to record your vulnerability handling process and your responsible disclosure policy. That needs to be in your internal documentation. And of course, your risk assessment that, of course, your CISO's office has already done, and the test results and any other standards that you conform to. That all needs to be in your documentation. Every time you have a new release, you need to record this documentation and put it in a box for 10 years. And if at some point the market surveillance authorities come by, you need to provide that documentation to them. So you need to have, with every release, all of this information gathered. As I said, the CRA regulates the end product, not how you got there. If I could make a suggestion, a lot of this can be automated. Product maturity milestone. So every time something goes through CI, it is grabbing the documentation that you've prepared and compiling it and then putting it somewhere safe for the next 10 years. This is an overwhelming undertaking for an initial declaration of conformity in large organizations. The information is probably already there, but again, managing to gather it all and get it in one place is a lot. So you need to survey your own landscape, the space where you work. Think about the information that you need, where it's documented, what you know, and what cybersecurity gaps there are after seeing those ESRs. And then it's time to recruit an executive. Getting your products ready for the CRA is going to require cooperation from programmers, from compliance, from management, from product, from every possible skill set within your company. everyone has to be engaged. This is not a thing where just your compliance department can swing by and be like, did you do this? Yeah. Did you do this? Cool. And leave and say, we did the thing that we're supposed to do. So you're going to need someone with organizational power who's fully on board and who has the influence and willingness to pause feature development if necessary. Good luck with that. It's really important. See, not doing this leads to really big fines, like really big fines. 15 million euros or 2.5% of annual global pass-through, whichever's higher. So if you are a Google, that's 2.5% of all of the money that came in year-round across the whole planet. Is a not small amount of money. So getting yourself that organizational support, hopefully this is a good way to start it. The sort of step-by-step process, of course, getting your executive on board, step 1. Step 2, plan for your long-term documentation. You have to keep it all for 10 years, so understand where that place is going to be. Is it going to be in a server, like underneath the CEO's desk? Is it going to be printed out and stuffed in a filing cabinet? I don't recommend that. Understand ahead of time where you're going to be putting it. It's kind of a really important detail. Then you have to get together inventory. So inventory your architectural documentation, inventory your vulnerability handling processes, and inventory every single component in every single product that you ship. No excuses for not knowing what's in there. You are going to carve off a piece to start with the pilot program. Find a team that is ambitious and likes pressure, and get them to try to start with this documentation process. You say, we will implement our CI/CD. We will start saving this information, and then we will see what it took for our team to implement. We will document it. We will pass it on to the rest of the organization, and then the whole company can become CRA ready. And that's the end. that's the end goal of prep. It's a lot. It's also really important, and also it's about damn time that our industry is putting together something consistent like this. For so long, you have had line engineers, people who are, hands in the code, who say, we need to like get to this thing that's in the backlog, that's been in the backlog for 6 years, but I'm concerned is a potential hole in our security. Now there's no excuse. Now we have to have it because it's the law, and it's the only way we're allowed to sell our product in Europe, and it's also the only way we can dodge those massive, massive fines. So I am going to suggest to all of you, go forth and terrify an executive. Tell them about inventorying components and see their faces go gray, especially you can find somebody who used to be an engineer and is now an executive. And that's how you start with get the ball rolling internally for all of the work that needs to come, including potentially pausing feature development. But for the finer details on how this really applies to your work specifically, there's going to be several standards published and cited by the European Commission on how to provide manufacturers with guidance on and presumption of conformity with the Cyber Resilience Act. And Dan's going to tell you about the browser-specific one.
Hi, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is this on? Yes. Hello. So, for how
Do you want the clicker?
Can you mirror it?
Clicker?
Can you make it mirrored?
Oh, can I mirror it? Sure. Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about how the CRA applies to web browsers. So Aki described how the Cyber Resilience Act applies to all products, and all of those requirements apply to anyone making a web browser. But there's extra requirements for web browsers because the European Commission identified right at the beginning that web browsers have high cybersecurity risk, that they're used by a bunch of other things. They're kind of the security basis, like operating systems and VPNs and other things. So first we'll talk about what a web browser is. The definition was some debate. Web browsers already do some things well, but there's some risks that are not treated fully in the market. And so how will the CRA apply? And then we'll talk about how the draft is going and the current progress on changing it. So just to introduce myself, I'm Daniel Ehrenberg. Now that I'm a Spanish citizen, I have two last names. So I'm Daniel Ari Ehrenberg Goldberg. Ari being my middle name in the US, but here it's my second first name. Or Little Dan on the internet. I've been working in web standards for a number of years. And then, like Aki working in ECMA International, I worked at Igalia in the past, and I live in a town called Las Roquetas del Garraf. And this is what we call the piruli, the symbol of the town. It's pretty humble, but that's kind of the vibe of the town, just south of Barcelona. And I formerly was the rapporteur of a group in ETSI, which is a European standards organization, working on standardizing web browser cybersecurity requirements for the CRA. So, not giving this in as claiming to be an ETSI representative. So, what is a web browser? They actually made a law about this. Some laws go through the European Parliament, like the CRA, but some more minor things are delegated to the Commission to just sort of do some consultation process and then pass like a little law within that scope. A browser is a product that renders web pages. And in particular, to be a browser, it has to be the main function of that product. And it includes standalone browsers and embedded browsers. Embedded browsers being like a component with an API that serves as a browser within another application. And AI agent integration. There are a lot of risks introduced by these various things. If you think about it, embedded browsers, if you look at kind of raw, full-featured web views, allow you these rich bridges for the host to kind of invade the application and scoop up any sensitive data. And the AI integration, as it's being done these days, often lets the browser do a bunch of things without the user intervention. How do we handle all those risks? How do we enumerate the risks? Anyway, that's a question that I don't know how to answer, and I'll explain a little bit later how we're deferring that question. So, a web browser has to be software that accesses general web content, not first-party content. If you embed WebKit in something and you use it to just run your UI or like trusted plugins from like a store, that's not a web browser. Just because something is built with web technologies doesn't make it a web browser. So don't worry about any of these CRA requirements applying to your Electron app. Unless you're building a browser out of Electron, which is probably not the best thing to do, unless you do it very carefully. But a WebView component is a browser, the component. A very frequently asked question is, are PWAs, web apps that you install on your home screen that have service workers that run offline that are functionally doing the same kind of thing as a local application, are they included? And the European Commission has always given the interpretation that they are not. However, web APKs, if you use web technology, if you make an app that has a web view that does everything, if you use Cordova, that is totally a product. So they're in scope of the CRA, but they're very much not browsers. They're just default products, the kind of products that, as Aki described, for default products, to demonstrate conformance, you just have to produce your internal technical documentation and save it in case later regulators ask for it. But for web browsers, there's a further requirement. Browsers are important. So important and critical are concepts defined in the CRA law itself to say that certain categories of products, which later we saw the definition of browser, which was used to kind of fill in a blank that was in the law here. Certain categories of products are important in the sense that they need an extra step of security to demonstrate that they actually meet the cybersecurity requirements. So for important class 1, which is what browsers are, you have two paths that you're allowed to choose from. Either you conform to a harmonized standard, and this is what's being developed for web browsers, or you get a third-party assessment. You get a conformity assessment body, some kind of approved private sector thing to look at your technical documentation, inspect what you're doing, and approve your product. Approve this based on their kind of analysis. They might test the actual product as well as looking at the documentation. They could interview people in your company. It's much easier if you can do things through the self-documentation route. So having a harmonized standard allows you to continue to do the self-documentation route for these important products. And that's based on us doing a risk analysis, a risk assessment of the whole products category, and with multiple use cases inside the product category to describe more concretely what those high-level CRA essential cybersecurity requirements mean. So in my opinion, it's reasonable that browsers are considered important because they're the trusted base for lots of other software. If they're insecure, you're screwed. So what do browsers do well? All major browsers are open source in their core and use strong cybersecurity practices, including frequent updates, handling of vulnerabilities in a very prompt way. At least the major standalone browsers, up-to-date encryption practices, UIs that demonstrate risk. So some of these things are not necessarily in any specification. Like all browsers have UIs that indicate when TLS is broken, or these days when you're using HTTP, they show that that's risky. And this is the kind of thing that reduces risk. It's not necessarily about making something impossible, but about sometimes informing the user or making something less likely. This is all risk-based, as Aki was saying. Designing APIs that protect privacy and preserve privilege boundaries, same origin policy, sandboxing, fuzz testing, all of these things contribute to security, and they contribute to the definition of security established by the CRA. There's a correspondence. The law was very well written, in my opinion. But there are a number of untreated risks or unhandled risks. Many deployments of browsers, especially embedded deployments, for example in televisions, are very out of date and do not get updated over time, even though they can be used to display arbitrary web content. We know that this is a big vector for vulnerabilities. There's a constant stream of CVEs against all browsers, so not being updated means you are vulnerable. A lot of times people like to say, well, we'll do a risk-based analysis. We know that there's a vulnerability, but is the risk really high? And the answer, yes, it is. Like, come on. You can't just say risk-based and wash away all of your sins, but people continue to do that. If you let users access the web, the open web, not just your app store, they will trust their browser. They just will not think about, well, I'm on a TV rather than a phone, so this is probably not a good idea. They'll just think that they're using the web, and they will access arbitrarily important things. I think this is also true of an in-app browser in a social media app or anything like that, maybe the probability that they'll do it is a little bit lower. But I don't think users generally assign a different trust level to such browsers. Maybe if they have a corporate laptop, they'll have a sense that that is a higher trust level, but there's no lower floor. So a difficult part about developing this standard is that the European Commission asked for a risk-based approach where we define different use cases, and some use cases should be lower risk, so should have easier requirements. But for web browsers, which, agreeing with the definition that was established in law, can access the web, there just is no low-risk case. You need to update against upstream. So further, more about how the CRA might apply to web browsers. In our session tomorrow morning, I hope we can go into some of these in more detail because they can be a very fun area to do some kind of philosophical investigation and thought. So here's one of the essential cybersecurity requirements. To protect the confidentiality of data stored, transmitted, or otherwise processed data, personal or other, such as by encrypting relevant data at rest or in transit. So TLS is a clear thing, but how do we define TLS? For example, what does this mean about the root stores? Browsers all maintain the major browsers all have very well parsed root store maintenance policies that are intended to kind of shape the ecosystem in a positive direction. So maybe saying that they have a documented root store and update policy mechanism is relevant for cybersecurity, because if they don't, it's probably going to be insecure. There's the thing about making sure to update roots over time is also probably a security necessity for browsers, but that's not in any kind of TLS standard. And then to the extent that we do reference standards, how do we deal with versions of things changing over time? I mean, the European Commission is even skeptical, or has historically been skeptical, of citing any IETF standard at all. Other web standards are even more complicated with versioning. Other one is process only data that's relevant, so data minimization. So same origin policy contributes to this. You should only give personally identifying information like camera or microphone information with consent. So in standards, web standards, we often call this powerful features only with express permission. What about cookies? The state of the art of almost all browsers is to block third-party cookies, and all major browsers include an option in settings to block third-party cookies. You could debate this. You could debate, it's really on the website to do the data minimization. But the security function of the web browser is to be a platform that other sites run on, and those might need to be in the scope of the CRA if they are, embedded in an app, or if they're an essential dependency of another thing that's definitely a product. So this is something that's debated and I think is in the current draft. So web browsers need to work towards data minimization of apps inside of them, because that's where they sit in the stack. They provide this secure base. This applies to other requirements as well. How am I doing on time? So
we're low on time.
We're low on.
We're low on time. Go
okay. Reduce impact through sandboxing and clearing storage. So another maybe simpler example of applying that principle is And this is something web browsers all already have, a way to clear storage per site, because not just a product-wide reset button, but there needs to be a reset button per site, which is what browsers already do. It's already reasonable. So in development of this standard, we had a draft, labeled the mature draft, published at the end of December. I think a number of people reviewed it, and it was pretty long. And the reviews were, there were a lot of problems with it. So we started over, making a common security model instead of like extra strong and extra insecure browsers that no one implements, and fixing factual errors and making sure that requirements are more high level instead of repeating a bunch of things that are in specifications, as well as some of these more detailed requirements that imply things about the underlying not the underlying requirements that relate to making sure that the website is secure. And we're drafting collaboratively among several contributors with code review. And following this common structure, there's an attempt to make sure that the different standards have things in common. So there's a shared skeleton that Etsy developed, and it's really about this product-driven approach where we're explaining how this meets the cybersecurity requirements rather than going by component. So there's a bunch of progress. So I mentioned use cases. These standards are broken down into, there are a bunch of requirements that the requirements are the ways that you demonstrate your conformance with the standard, but not all requirements apply to all products, because different products will face different kinds of risks. So you do a risk analysis, and the risk analysis is based on analyzing what happens in different use cases. So for example, you have a consumer browser, an enterprise browser with enterprise controls, which leads to a different set of options. And you also have embedded browsers, which could be either browser-like tabs, the higher level embedded browser components, or they could be, the unrestricted web views that let you spy into the page. The group decided so far to not treat the second case because it introduces too many extra risks, and also to not treat the risks related to an AI browser because, what even is that? We don't. There's also an Annex O, kind of describing that scoping. Annex V tries to give advice to browsers in terms of vulnerability handling. So in general, there's a different standard being developed by a different group of people which handles vulnerability handling requirements. But there's some specificity to understand how that relates to browsers, because that other standard can be a little bit vague. Everyone in the browser world really needs to understand that they need to rebase from upstream frequently. This is just not negotiable. It's not something you can evaluate in a risk-based way. You just need to do it. And you need to ship that to your customers. So yeah, here's code review where, I wrote some TLS requirements and somebody else commented on them. Andrew Whaley from Google has been a great contributor. So the project needs your help to move this standard forward. You can join the Matrix channel. You can comment online. This stuff is being developed in a GitLab instance hosted by Etsy. And there's a private one for development, but then whenever something lands, it gets posted here, and you can post comments. Those will be seen very much by the team. You can also join Etsy's Cyber EUSR committee. If you're an open source developer, you can join via OSI. They have deep involvement in this. So you would contact Simon Phipps, and I can put you in touch with him, and then you can just join this committee. For companies, there's a membership process, but I'm also happy to explain that to anyone one-on-one if they're interested. It can be quite fast to actually join once you are hooked up with the right people, and so this is all just via Markdown and GitLab. You can make PRs. Daniel Thompson is the current rapporteur or kind of chair of the subgroup, so please contact him if you're interested in participating as well. And yes, file issues. The group does not guarantee that the issues will be addressed, but they will be visible, and they may decide to address them. Right now, the group is in a state of almost ready to release the final draft. But when it's a final draft, that will still be subject to a longer review process. The final draft will be sent out to national bodies. So each country in Europe has a national standards body for review. And then you could submit comments to that national standards body. And then, informally, you could submit it to other national standards bodies. It'll be a whole thing to navigate. It's best if you give your review comments as soon as possible, because then it will be easier to address soon. Over the coming months, you will still be able to give review comments. It will just need to go through more bureaucracy. And I encourage you to submit comments according to whichever mechanism is appropriate, but please do comment. There's been a lot of work to address the comments that have already been
Just
given.
a little note on commenting. Be brief. Be specific. Follow the template and provide alternative text. The time for sort of generic, overall feedback has passed. And that stinks, because I would prefer to say, give me any comment you have and I will take it. But they're very, very low on time. And so if you provide specific alternative text, it's much easier for them to review that comment. If you do not, Dan's right in that your comment will still be there, so be visible, and the group can still act on it. But it's much easier for them to address if it is specific and brief and provides proposed text.
Yeah, I'm going to just disagree with that as like a private person. That advice had been given to everyone making comments. No one made comments. Then I told people individually, please just make your comment, say whatever you want. And they made very useful comments. And we progressed on the basis of those comments.
Right, but this is going to be done in 15 days?
Yeah, so everyone's been saying for a period of like 6 months that this is going to be done in like 15 days. And it keeps not being done. Please just make your comments. You're saying the correct thing.
The European Commission is paying for me to be here. Nobody's paying for him to be here. He can say what he wants.
So, any Q&A?
I'm sorry.
Do we not have time?
But
I'm sorry.
what I can inform everyone is that you're going to be at the at a breakout session tomorrow at 10. So all of your great questions can go in there, I hope.
Can we take just 1 or 2 questions?
Okay, well, one question, I guess.
Right there. That's the first hand I saw. White t-shirt. No? No? Okay.
Sorry.
So you mentioned that PWAs are considered exempt, but you also mentioned Web APK specifically are not exempt?
Yeah, they're just apps.
But Web APKs aren't something that authors generate, they're something that the browser generates, as far as my understanding is. Web APKs are what Chromium generates.
If you put it in the App Store,
if it's something your user installs on their own device, it's at baseline, it's a default product.
Okay, so it's like if you bundle it yourself, put it in the App Store yourself, and then it's included.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Can we take one more question?
Yeah, sure.
From the person who's there. Yeah.
I feel kind of bad now because this might put you on the spot a bit. So
I love those questions.
My apologies in advance. Thanks for this presentation. It was very, very informative. I have a question that may be outside of your remit, but there has been separate work to this that the EU have been doing to kind of like weaken encryption, right? And how this feels contradictory.
It is contradictory.
Okay. And I guess my question is about how does the CRA fit or doesn't fit into that? And is there work happening in the CRA that is a bit more hopeful in that direction?
Yes, all of the vertical standards will have a separate annex covering encryption, both like sort of with breadth and also with specifics for that kind of product. So, for example, I work on the VPN standard. The encryption annex for the VPN standard is long and prescriptive, and there's no wiggle room. There's no, if your government tells you to give them a backdoor, you need to give them a backdoor. That does not exist in the standard. So I can't pretend like I know what's going to happen in the future, but I know that the standards for conformity that cover encryption are not playing games.
Thank you.
Yeah, the philosophical debate about what Aki was saying about exactly how to word the encryption requirements is fun, but a thing that's been really constant is the CRA doesn't generally have clauses that say, well, if there's this thing and then there's this other law and they kind of conflict, then the CRA just kind of backs down. It has that with respect to which products are in scope, but this also comes up with GDPR. Some people said, well, data minimization, that sounds like GDPR. Shouldn't you just be following that rule instead? And with introducing concepts of consent? And the answer is no. I mean, the laws just both apply. So, the CRA requires that you protect data. You're required to protect data. And it doesn't have like a clause that takes that back. So it's for someone else, not us, to work through those contradictions. I mean, I guess it is for the manufacturers also. Yeah.
Thank you for letting us take questions.
Thank you, Dan and Aki.
Thanks, everyone.